First of all, I'll start a little introduction in French to also present or prepare the audience who are following us from outside, or a few words in French, and then we will pursue in English. Bonjour tout le monde, nous sommes très contents de vous accueillir aujourd'hui dans cette séance La Palestine dans le regard des Juifs pour comprendre de ce qui se passe en Palestine maintenant d'un point de vue juif. Désolé, on va aujourd'hui, par respect d'un de nos conférenciers qui parle mieux l'anglais que le français, on va dérouler, en fait, la conférence aujourd'hui va se dérouler en anglais. So we will be presenting in English because this is the language mastered by our guests, and then we hope that we will also speak in a way that will be comprehensible to our francophonic community. Welcome everybody, welcome for those who are following us inside in person, and those who are following us online. We are very happy to be with you and to be with our guests who accepted our invitation, to come to speak to us and to present their point of view about what is happening in Palestine. Thank you for them, and thank you for all of you who are watching us and attending with us today. So today we are having with us Rabbi Dovid Feldman. Rabbi Dovid Feldman. He is a spokesman for Neturei Karta International, which is abbreviated as NKI, an organization founded in the 1930s in Jerusalem to protect the Jewish community from the new Zionist movement. Over the past few decades, NKI has been actively publicizing the voice of many Jewish communities around the world against the Zionist ideology, the Zionist state and its crimes committed against the Palestinian people. Rabbi Feldman and his colleagues frequently appeared at public events and are regularly giving television and radio interviews everywhere, including many Arab countries, to express their sympathy and solidarity with Palestinian people. They also visited Gaza Strip, the besieged Gaza Strip, several times to show their solidarity and also to deliver humanitarian aids to Palestinians. So please let us join me welcoming Dr. Rabbi Feldman. Also, we have with us Dr. Greener, Jesse Greener, who is in fact a colleague of mine in Laval University, and he's a Jewish Canadian born into a secular family in Toronto, where his family arrived after the World War II. Before the war, his family lived in Zamość in Poland, the same town as Rosa Luxemburg. His surviving family fled Zamość with the Red Army. The rest of his family who remained behind were lost, unfortunately, in concentration camps. After the SS Schutzstaffel arrived shortly thereafter. Dr. Greener is currently a professor in the Department of Chemistry in Laval University, and he's also an active member of several organizations, including Science for Peace, and also the Organization of Independent Jewish Voices, IGV. Dr. Greener previously served on the IGV steering committee, among others, and helped establish their Quebec chapter. So welcome, Dr. Greener, and join me welcoming Dr. Greener, please. So we are here today to see what's happening in Palestine and to understand what's happening in Palestine. So I think no need to talk about the details because all the world is seeing what is happening there. We are talking about attacks happening from Israeli forces on Palestinian people living in Gaza Strip, and this is in response to an attack made by Hamas against Israeli forces there. And I prefer to start with the quote that was made by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in 2023, where he said, "Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7 did not happen in a vacuum. Yes, there was casualties on both sides, but the context here is important, and this is the context that Secretary General of UN is mentioning. He said that Palestinians have been living or subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation, and he's probably mentioning what was happening since 1967 up to now, up to these days, where Palestinians were besieged and were deprived from their rights to date. And he's mentioning that these attacks that no one likes to have any casualties on either sides, but there is an action and a reaction. So no need also to present the evolution of how was Palestine in 1907 or before 1917, before Balfour Declaration, and how it arrived and how it reached, how it became after 1948, the date of declaration of the State of Israel, and how the occupation in the little green zones here are the remaining zones after the whole Palestine was inhabited by Palestinians. Now they are only living in the Gaza Strip here, and also in the in French Cisjordania or the West Bank. And these two, or the West Bank is also occupied by Israeli forces. So about casualties, Palestine has been bombarded in a way that is unprecedented. Palestine has been bombarded in a way, in an intensity that is unprecedented on Earth. So in fact, if we made some calculations calculating how many bombs have been dropped onto Gaza, and we compared that figure with what was dropped onto Afghanistan and what was dropped on Iraq and Syria, and we can see here that this, by the way, these calculations was weeks old, so certainly they have changed, they are increased. So Gaza has been bombarded 115,000 times higher than Iraq and Syria. The intensity of bombardment is 220,000 times higher if normalized to the small area and the short duration of attack, which is within 30 days. So the casualties, all of us know how many people have been. So we have 40,000 casualties, 12,000 of them killed, and majority of them are children, and 30,000 are injured. So we have these, and also on the Israeli side, we have also 1,200 persons killed and more than, or about 6,000 injured. So we do not like any casualties on either side, but what are the causes and what is going there? This is what we are going to understand more by in our discussion. Also, we don't need to talk about the massacres that has been occurring then in the hospital Ma'madani, Jabalia Residential Square, Shifa Hospital, and yesterday the school of Al Fakhura, which is a place for a refugees place for Palestinian, a school in fact where many Palestinians are living there, and we saw 200 persons killed yesterday by an Israeli attack, and no need to mention how many residential units has been destroyed, how many hospitals, how many educational facilities, how many ambulance cars and vehicles, how many places of worship have been destroyed in the last few days. And we have a calculation here that there is about 42 in every hour. There are 42 bombs dropped on Gaza, 12 buildings destroyed in every hour, 15 people are killed, six of whom are children. 35 people are injured every hour. So this is what we are in now, and we would like now to understand more about what is happening from our dear guests, Rabbi Feldman and Dr. Greener. And please, we are mentioning to the audience that they can post their questions in the comment sections under videos of Facebook, the live Facebook and the live YouTube broadcasting that we are making now. You can put your questions in the comment sections for those who are following us online, and for those who are attending, they can raise their hands when we open the period of questions. Thank you so much. So we would like to start with now. So we would like to start now with a question to our guests. So we would like to give them the talk to speak about themselves and to also tell us how many Jews they represent, or their sect represents amongst Jews in Israel and amongst Jews worldwide. So we would like to know more about them, their activities, and their understanding of the situation, and how many Jews they represent, that their sect represents in Israel and worldwide. So we'll start with Rabbi Feldman. So please, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for having us here. It's an honor for me to be able to address the students. The students is very important because we have the new generation and we are expecting a better future with the new generation, hopefully. How many Jews we represent? It's basically we are representing a religion. We are representing an entire Jewish people. They are those who continue the original traditional Judaism, and sadly there are those who are confused. Sadly, the majority of Jewish people today don't practice Judaism, and you know, with all due respect to every individual, people who don't follow Judaism cannot represent the Jewish religion and cannot represent the Jewish people as a whole. Yes, observant Jews are the minority, but we are a very strong minority amongst the entire world. We have in many major cities, major countries, the main concentration of anti-Zionist Jews, we can say the largest, is most probably in Al-Quds, Jerusalem, in occupied Palestine, still today, still active. Second would be New York, where I'm from, and we have Montreal, where my colleagues are from. In England, there are many parts of the world. There are hundreds of thousands of Jewish people worldwide who disagree with the state of Israel. Not all of them come out in public, and not all of them will have the courage to face all intimidations that everyone can assume. Anyone in university that dares to speak up, I don't know how our close friends managed in the university to do like something which is so strongly anti-Zionist. I can assume that there was some Zionist students try to make problems we
still have liberty.
Right, which is good. You should appreciate that, because in the States it's way more complicated, and this is what silences so many people that don't really express their positions regarding all what is happening. But so many people are so disturbed by this occupation going on for so long, and especially the last couple of weeks since October 7th. And as was said before, certainly what happened in October 7th is not something that anybody chooses. Nobody appreciates what happened. Unfortunately, this is a tragedy, but this is a part of this larger tragedy, as Secretary General of the United Nations said. Unfortunately, we are witnessing this tragic result of the tragic situation going on for so long. And this has to stop. And you can continue, I believe, in the
Thank you
discussion.
So much. Thank you. So thank you so much, Rabbi Feldman. Now, Dr. Greener, please, for the same question, how many Jews do you think you will be talking about or representing, and what is your general views? And please have a short snapshot about your activities. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much. I do appreciate the invitation to be here. I think there's many things to say. I'll start with the direct question. Well, I would say similarly, I don't want to state any numbers here. It's difficult to quantify the numbers of Jews that we would quote unquote represent. And by we, I would say independent Jewish voices in Canada. I would prefer to give a description of what we represent. So we are a collective of Jewish people, observant and non-observant. I agree with Rabbi Feldman's perspective that there are a vast majority of Jews that are not represented by the traditional Jewish establishment, if we can call it that, in Canada and other sort of Western countries. And so from either perspective of a very religious approach or a community that maybe is more dispersed and less defined of Jews. We think it's really important that there are diversity of ways for Jewish people to express themselves outside of those kind of concretized, established, I hesitate to say official voices of the Jewish people. And so what's very interesting is when you allow Jews to express themselves in the way that they see they fit into that mosaic of the culture and religion. More often than not, what you find is that there's a lot of overlap with the goals of the vast majority of people in the regions that they are located, in their countries, in their cities and communities, with their brothers and sisters from different backgrounds who are also here, the Muslim brothers and sisters, even people who have no religion or, don't have a concrete vision of their background or culture. We are human.
Yeah.
We understand human needs. And I think that goes for everybody. When you give people the chance to express themselves, we have overlap that's vastly more significant than the differences between us.
Yes.
And so, Independent Jewish Voices, while we try to provide the opportunity to make those cultural and religious links among our members, and to make those links, I would say, with outside of our group, with solidarity links with other groups that are important and communities that are marginalized. We also are focusing very specifically on specific issues that were the birth of our organization. So, and these are coming from largely the occupied areas of Palestine and so-called Israel. So we have focused on, I would just give a quick background of the organization. We started with the Alliance of Concerned Jewish Canadians, I think in roughly 2005. Maybe I should even step one step backwards. The war that occurred against Iraq following the attacks in 2001, in Canada, there was a really big anti-war movement that I would say was somewhat successful in keeping Canada out of that war. I was involved. But what we saw, everybody knows, is after that, in many Western countries, including Canada, Muslims were demonized, largely, we could say. So coming out of that, there was first I was involved as a student leader in Ontario. I was the president of the Ontario portion of the Canadian Federation of Students. And what I was involved in at that point when I became the president was we immediately launched a task force on the needs of Muslim students on campuses, because this was in 2005. And at that point, we saw the encroachment of Islamophobia and other, heinous, human tendencies, I guess, to other people who are, being demonized. And so through that process, there was, a really interesting solidaristic approach among students and amongst Jews that crystallized in terms of what was happening in Palestine, which was, a continuous occupation and brutalization of the Palestinian people. And so after a few changes of identity, Independent Jewish Voices, largely in relationship to the Independent Jewish Voices UK, then was the formation that was started here in Canada. And that was after 2008. Since then, we focus on this as a main issue in Palestine, although we do try to diversify our work, and whether it's a boycott, divestments, and sanctions campaign, which we were the first Canadian, if I'm not wrong, mainstream Jewish group that took on that campaign as that we agreed with. I'm talking about organizations, not religious sects, that obviously hold that very closely to their hearts as well. We are working, I'll address some of the questions that you've posed to us privately later about what is anti-Semitism. We're very interested in focusing on this so that we can open the discussion about this and let, as the good rabbi said, let people express themselves in a way that they're not fearful for reprisal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Green. Thank you so much. So, given that you mentioned the word anti-Semitism, so many people might think that when we talk about or when we criticize objectively the brutality of whatever country, whatever sect, whatever group of people, it doesn't extend to religion. It is something we need to separate. So I would like to understand what we are doing now, is it belonging to anti-Semitism or it is something else? So I would, in the same order, I would like to listen from Rabbi.
There is so much to speak about this, about anti-Semitism. Well, obviously, criticizing Israel has nothing to do with anti-Semitism whatsoever. I always say if a Jewish person should be law-abiding to his country. Now, if somebody passes the red light, the traffic light against the law, and it happens to be that the individual is a Jew, and then the policeman stops him and gives him a fine, that's not anti-Semitism. It's basically, stopping a crime from happening or for continuing. It's very simple. Unfortunately, what is happening in Palestine, not only now but already for decades, this is a true, on top of this tragedy inflicted on other people. These are true crimes. And it's not only crimes in international law, this is crimes in Judaism. All killing and stealing, all of this is totally forbidden. We as Jewish people condemn it. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. If one criticizes a Jew because he is Jewish, if somebody dislikes a Jew because the family he comes from, or the race where he comes from, or the religion he practices, then that obviously is anti-Semitism, and we don't find that today in our day and age. Yes, we might find some anti-Semites, something that shouldn't happen, shouldn't take place. But unfortunately, this anti-Semitism accusation is a political tool which is being used amongst many other political tools to silence whoever dares to speak up against the occupation of Palestine, the state of Israel, the so-called Jewish state. And we should not allow this to happen. And I have to add, by using this anti-Semitism accusation, what is happening is this is true anti-Semitism. This is causing true anti-Semitism, because what the Zionist movement is doing, what this propaganda is doing, is confusing people to think that all Jews are the same and that all Jews support these crimes and all Jews commit these crimes. What happens naturally out of this is that, unfortunately, not intentionally, but people are being driven to hate all Jews, because if all Jews support this, then we are upset with all Jews. Even then we can argue whether that is anti-Semitism, but at least it is definitely causing harm. In addition to what is being caused, what is being inflicted to the Palestinian people, it is causing true harm, danger, threat, and hate to the Jewish people. And we say that today, even though anti-Semitism is way older than Zionism, and even though that anti-Semitism might still be around, but in a large scale, the exacerbation of anti-Semitism for the past decades is directly caused by the actions of the State of Israel, or by the confusions that the Zionist movement is trying to confuse the masses.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Feldman, about this. And also, I think one of the main purposes of such meetings is to confront the possible and potential hatred that might be inseminated in the hearts of people around the world because of the action of Israel. And we are here to mention that there is a separation, complete separation between Israel and Jews in general. So thank you so much for mentioning that. Dr. Greener, please, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I'm in total agreement. The idea of anti-Semitism is clear. It's hatred against Jews. Maybe I'll just quickly read our published definition of a definition of anti-Semitism, which is that it is not an exceptional form of bigotry. It's a form of bigotry. We see all sorts of forms of bigotry. We oppose all of it. We oppose all racism. We don't exceptionalize any one of them because that then reduces the impact of the other bigotries that are observed and that are unfortunately occurring in the world. And if we want to truly have a equitable world that we can all live in and benefit from and collaborate within, we have to recognize, that all forms of bigotry have to be eliminated. So people, we go on to say that people who hate and discriminate or attack Jews are going to be the same people who hate and discriminate or attack other groups.
Yeah.
Very often. These include racialized people, Muslims, LGBT, women, indigenous people. This all is extremely problematic, and we oppose all of it. And the excellent point raised that exceptionalizing bigotry against Jews by focusing exclusively or nearly exclusively on the term anti-Semitism as a sort of a hierarchy of bigotry being near the top, let's say. This leads to various conflicts in logic, actually. So, especially when it's clear that the anti-Semitism is, I would say, weaponized often against criticism against Israel. Mm-hmm. So this was mentioned. This is understood by many people. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side, if we want to have an honest discussion about bigotry, we also want to have an honest discussion about the sources, and we also want an honest discussion about tangentially related issues. And if we want to condemn Israel, if we want to critique Israel, if we want to congratulate Israel, I mean, it has to be done on the same playing field that we do with other countries. And so I would say one thing is that we're very concerned about the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA, which is a sort of a political movement, I would say, that is rebranding anti-Semitism and focusing that as in contrast to or with respect to criticism of Israel. And so the IHRA is a definition, a sort of a revamped definition of anti-Semitism, which seems purposely vague. It seems purposefully oriented towards criticism of Israel almost exclusively. If you look at the examples given in the IHRA, 7 of the 11 examples are talking about Israel, not about daily lives of Jews who are really affected by anti-Semitism in many cases. So we think it undermines, of course, it undermines Palestinian human rights because it puts up another barrier to having that discussion. Now we have to discuss if we're being anti-Semitic by just discussing Palestine before we can get to the issue. Just like we have to, it seems like there's this sort of ritual in the media where you have to discuss Hamas before you can get to the fact that there's people dying at an alarming rate. Yeah. Another barrier. Yeah. Of course, it affects freedom of expression, academic freedom, and it's based on this idea of weaponization of anti-Semitism. So I guess I'll leave it at that. But I would just say that this is a very loaded term, and we do need to have that term in a clear way that clearly defines a clear problem, but not load it with other background.
Thank you so much. So we remind you that you can always take the opportunity to post questions, and we are receiving questions online, and we'll take a pause to respond to the questions that we are receiving. So let's start, dear guests, by the words taken or an excerpt from Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. He met a famed professor, Canadian professor called Jordan Peterson, and he expressed his views about Israel and the rights of Palestinians. So he made the excerpt from his words. He said, and his meeting with Dr. Peterson is online, present on YouTube. His argument is that we came in the beginning of the 20th century. There was no Palestinians. There was no Palestine. It was an empty land, barren, wasted land. We started to cultivate it. We started to build anew. city and new cities and new civilization, and then Palestinians came to and immigrated when they saw this reconstruction of their lands. So of the land, they came back, or they immigrated to Israel, and then they started to claim this is our land and this is Palestine, and we and so they said, he said, his conclusion, Netanyahu, his views is that it is a Jewish land. Israeli belong to this land. The land belongs to Israeli. There was no Arab. It is not. The Arabs can live or can coexist with Jews as long as they admit it is Israeli Jewish land, and then it will be peace. So, what are your comments about these comments of Netanyahu about his views about the Palestinian lands and this territory, and what are your responses about that, or your comments about that, dear guests? And it is open for you, whoever wants to start with. Okay.
Sure. I mean, I'm not. I just came from preparing for my course for tomorrow morning at 8:30. My mind is not about the history of Israel. We all know that these kinds of things, this kind of opinion is put forward. It's often based in sort of scriptural arguments, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that. I'll let more informed people speak to that. But I can say what is happening now. It looks a lot like colonization that happened in lots of other European colonized countries, except for it's accelerated and it's much more brutal. But we live, coming from a Canadian perspective, we know that colonization has had a huge effect on the people, the First Nations that were here. And the idea that someone who's never set foot in the Middle East, let alone in the borders of Israel, could have a right to go there and take up citizenship just because of something that, let's say, really I would say connects me in a very artificial way there to that place. And I have friends who are here in Canada now who are dispossessed of their previous involvement in that, their livelihoods, their families, their history from that region. Modern history, ancient history, is ludicrous to me. It really doesn't make any sense. And the only way it makes sense to me is that it's a political institution. Israel is a political entity to me. That's what I see. That's what I see when I look at that. It's like a country that is trying to expand its borders and secure its territory and grow its economy, or a very sort of normal political things. And just like Canada, there was no country Canada before European colonization started. Personally, I would just say that Canada is, as a colony, as a settler nation, countries don't have necessarily a right to exist. They just exist from the historical reasons that led it to where we are. So I don't have anything to say necessarily directly about Israel on that front, but I think colonization can be very brutal, and part of colonization is to bring in as many settlers as possible, and that's exactly what happened in Canada and the U.S. And to open the doors to Jews to come and just populate Israel, that's a political tactic, I would say, to secure the area and have more people occupying that area. And unfortunately, given that that's a military occupation, you're putting civilians into that situation, much like is what's said very often of what Hamas does. But those people are actually just, anyway, I don't want to get too deep into that, but I will just say that the history of Israel looks like a brutal version of what we see in North America. And I think even in North America, we still haven't come to grips with our slightly longer history of colonization. And there's a problem with that here too. And so I think the reason that people are confused about what Israel is all about is because they're coming from a colonial country in the first place, and they're confused about the history of their own country. Let's say if I'm talking about Canadians. So I look forward to a perspective that might be based in more, long history and other aspects I haven't addressed. But I think these are very often fallacious arguments that need to be, looked at with a very long view.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Greener and Rabbi Feldman. Could you please elaborate on that?
For the rest of my life, I'll be able to say that I learned something in the University of Laval. Learning that Netanyahu still holds on to that saying, a land without a people, is a shock to me. I didn't expect that. Basically, everybody knows today that it was a land with a people. There's no way to argue on this. There were 700 facts of history. There were 700, and everybody agrees to this today. It's puzzling that Netanyahu still holds on to this. There were at least 750,000 refugees in 1948,
which is 50% of the population of Palestinians at that time.
Okay, and we have millions of Palestinians, in Canada and many parts of the world, who generations back lived in Palestine. Now there is no way to argue. There's no way to debate this. As Dr. Greener said, that usually what the Zionist movement is using, they're using an argument that scripturally it belongs to the Jews. And this is an argument that nobody can, debate, because very little people have the information to debate this. And I would gladly spend a couple of minutes with the permission here to a little bit elaborate on this. People should understand, what we're dealing with. First of all, to begin with, we have a secular movement founded and run by people who refuse to follow the Jewish religion and still misuse that religion to justify crimes forbidden in that religion. Now, this is a whole total hypocrisy. It doesn't make any sense. But they play on the ignorance of masses of people, Jews and non-Jews. And this is one of the ways how they are so successful, because they use ignorant people, and then they educate the youth on total ignorance in the basics of Judaism, regarding to basics of Judaism generally speaking, and especially what's in regards to Zionism. And to make this very short, I'll try. One of the famous concepts they're using all the time is the promised land. God promised the Holy Land to the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Jewish people. And many people, non-Jews, know about this. And this is a religious concept, and no one wants to fight any religion. Nobody wants to fight God, and nobody wants to fight the Jewish people. Anti-Semitism, as was discussed before. But what is happening here, this is true propaganda. And how can I say propaganda when I admit that this is a true concept in Judaism? But when you use a true concept and you misuse it, you show one side of it and you don't show the other side of it, this is basically misusing the religion, and this is basically hypocrisy. Yes, there is a concept that God promised the land to the Jewish people, but the other side of the coin is, which is very simple in Judaism, we just have to scratch the surface a little bit. And if I have time, I will give you verses and quotes and all of this. But we have to be short. It's basically the land was promised to the Jewish people, and it was promised to the Jewish people on condition. There's a verse in Leviticus that says twice, the land should not reject you because you defile it. Meaning that if you defile the land, if you don't remain in the level of holiness God requires of you, you would be expelled from the land. This is unfortunately what happened afterwards. God, several hundred years after the Jews were brought into the Holy Land, God warned the Jews through the prophets, and there's many verses in the books of the prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, that unless the Jewish people will repent, they will be exiled from the land. Unfortunately, this is what happened. The Jewish people were exiled from the land. Now, all Jews throughout all generations accepted the concept of Jewish exile as a divine decree, and that we are forbidden to fight this decree of God by any physical means. What Jewish people wait for is the ultimate redemption, which is going to be a spiritual future where all mankind will serve. We say in our high holiday prayers, we say, all peoples will form one bond to serve God together in peace. We say in our daily prayers 3 times a day, our eyes should merit to see when you, God, will return to Zion, to Jerusalem. This is not something about fighting one another. This is a spiritual future where we are looking. We say in the end of each of our prayers, we say, we yearn and we wait when the kingdom of God would be revealed throughout the universe. This is something about a spiritual future. Now, Jews are required during our exile to live as loyal citizens in the countries where we live, to live peaceful with our neighbors, to pray for the well-being. There's a verse in Jeremiah, you should pray for the well-being of the city where you live, because if the city will have peace, you will have peace. This is exactly how Jewish people are supposed to act. This is how Jewish people believed and acted for thousands of years. This was accepted by all Jews throughout all generations without any exception. This was basic Judaism 101. Until the beginning of Zionism over 100 years ago, when Theodor Herzl, not only a secular Jew, but an outspoken heretic who hated God and hated his religion, hated the religion of his grandparents, and turned his back to everything before him, prior to him. And those people, and only those people, came up with a philosophy which is so contrary to basics of Judaism. Now, this would be forbidden, this will be contrary to Judaism, this will be considered blasphemy and heresy, even without any crimes to it, even without any oppression of anyone, even if this is in peace with everyone. Jews are forbidden to end exile, Jews are forbidden to fight any nation, Jews are forbidden to immigrate in mass immigration to the Holy Land. This is basics. But when this happened in Palestine, by committing so many crimes, not a land without a people, a populated land, and either kill them, in many cases kill them, many cases threaten them to leave and to expel them. Unfortunately, so much tragedy to others, in addition to the basic violation of basics of Jewish belief. These crimes committed to Palestine is not only a violation of international law, this is a true violation of Judaism, killing, stealing, oppressing an entire people. Now, all of this is in total contrast of Judaism. There is no way that one can justify what is in front of our eyes with the Jewish religion. And certainly not those secular people running a secular movement, misusing a religion which condemns everything they stand for from beginning to end. And there is no way to condone this.
Yeah. Very inspiring. Thank you so much, Rabbi Feldman, about these explanations that are very, in fact, calming. And my question is that Jews in Israel, they constitute about, I think their population now are 5 million. How these information and these fundamental understanding, if I can say, about Judaism has been deformed by probably secular leaders, and they have now they think they are following the religion, and they think they are following the Torah, and they are in fact energized by certain scriptures in the Torah. So how could you explain? Because what you are saying is really very, very, I think good and very good for the humanity, and I think the majority of people who are listening to us, they don't think that they because of what is happening, the majority of people who are seeing the atrocities of Israel and seeing them reading the Torah before doing their atrocities, and in war places and war fields, they are having the Torah in hands, and so how can we just make a compromise with what I said and what you've said? Thank you so much.
It's a very sad question. It's sad to me, and it's embarrassing to me, this question. And I appreciate the question. First of all, to begin with, as I said before, Israel, generally speaking, is not religious. It's a secular movement, and secular is very, very politely said. It's basically a heretic movement. They are attempting to uproot Judaism on a large scale. It's not only secular. But true, these sad images that we see recently, it's not only recently where we see religious people, unfortunately committing the worst crimes, and then, you know, together with the Torah scroll and with the religious observance and the prayers and all of that. Again, it's very sad, it's very embarrassing. Unfortunately, generally speaking, as I said before, the vast majority of Israelis have no connections with Judaism whatsoever. They have no idea of anything of the religion of their grandparents. Those religious Zionists, which happen to be the minority amongst them, but they are being used as the window, they're being used as the beautiful face of this occupation, to give this religious face to the occupation, then you don't dare to criticize it. And what they're doing, in addition to misrepresenting the religion, they're basically embarrassing the religion. This is the greatest desecration of God's name. There's no way to explain it, but to explain where these people come from, I can just tell you a little story. There's, maybe you're aware, there's one of the largest pro-Israeli celebrations in the world is an annual Salute to Israel parade in New York City. And we stand each and every year protesting that rally. And we start standing on the sidelines of the march. And then all those students, all those groups from different schools. And then one year, one group goes past, and then, you know, they block they stop the parade in the middle for pedestrians to cross over. And there's a student looking at the anti-Zionist Jews, and then the principal comes over and says, you know, Jewish people should not look in the face of evil. And they just got the students not to look even on our side, which is okay. I don't mind. But why? Why do you mind? Why do you mind? You see what's going on. These people have something to say, you know, you can take it or leave it. You don't have to accept what these people say. And if the school disagrees with the anti-Zionist Jews, just you explain to your students why these anti-Zionist Jews are wrong. You know, a freedom of speech, and the students should have the freedom to see and to learn and to decide for themselves. This is part of this propaganda where they mislead the young generation, they mislead the general public to only see one side of the coin, and they simply don't have no idea what's going on. If this massive propaganda, Zionist propaganda, makes people believe, even some religious Jews, that in order to be Jewish, you have to support Israel, otherwise you're the traitor of the Jewish people. You know, the non-Jewish person would be criticized as the anti-Semite, and then the Jewish person will be considered as the self-hating Jew or the traitor for the Jewish people. And basically this is built on massive ignorance, with all due respect.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Feldman. So we have repeated, do you want to, okay, yeah.
I want to make I would say a few things here. Number one, well, if we talk about Zionism, and we talk about if what's led Israel astray, or led people who support Israel astray. I mean, I'm not going to make this argument from a religious perspective, but I do want to say that my point that Israel is a political project is, I think, the indicting part of where it's going, because political countries have different goals than their stated goals sometimes. And if your stated goal is that you are a Jewish country, I see the conflict, of course, where, you know, observant Jews and those people who have a crystallized understanding of the Jewish spirit and the culture that's around that, how that comes in conflict with what they see. So but I would just like to make a slight, I wouldn't say correction, but slight protestation, that the problem is not necessarily secular Jews. The problem is the political project takes on a life of its own. It uses secular Jews, it uses religious Jews, it uses non-Jews. The biggest, you know, the biggest Zionist in the world might be, or at least the most important, might be Joe Biden, right? These are, you know, this is a support, because, and depending on what your definition of Zionism is, if you see it as a route to a political, a specific political goal in the region, crystallizing around the formation of Israel, then we've got plenty of Zionists that are, secular, Jewish, and completely, non-Jewish Christians. Christian Zionism is a huge connection to the whole question, and we can talk. I would be very, very interested to hear about the perspectives that you may have on that, Rabbi Feldman. But I think we need to look at the solutions may also come from a secular or a religious or a completely non-Jewish perspective as well. And so we need to open all those doors, because right now they're closed.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Greener. So, given that you mentioned Zionism and also Rabbi Feldman, so I would like you, Dr. Greener, to shed some light on the definition of Zionism. What is it? What is it about? How could I think, from my understanding, that Zionism is a collaboration between colonial Jews and colonial Christians, or West. If my definition is correct, I would like to hear from you your understanding about Zionism and how it brought Jews and Christians to initiate the state of Israel and become behind and a major supporter of the state up to our days.
So my background is in chemistry and physics. I'm not a historian, okay. So I will give my perspective on that.
Yes,
but I'm not speaking with authority on this question. Mm-hmm. But it seems pretty clear that Zionism is related to a political project. So and I have to say that the conflation with Zionism or anti-Zionism, let's say, and anti-Semitism is, off the table for me. These are not equatable terms. And again, it comes back to the idea of trying to silence a real discussion. And I think a real discussion should include the very question you posed: what is it? Mm-hmm. What does Zionism mean? And who's involved in it? And I look at things at a very neutral way. I see a country, I see the supports for that country. They're within, they're without. Canada's a huge supporter of Israel. Canada's sort of a Zionist supporter. The media, our media is quite Zionist in terms of its unconscious bias towards the project of Israel. And it's an impediment to the discussion of actually what is going on if we can't, identify the roots and who's supporting. We could talk about, the Christian Zionists who see, from my understanding, kind of a very ironic or difficult, perspective where they support the project of Israel because for them it's actually a means to an ends of their own, interpretation of their scriptures. And quite negative ones, in the sense that this is going to be a place of final conflict that actually benefits Christians in the end. I mean, so I mean, it's a very complicated issue that I don't want to speak forcefully on, but it seems to me that it's biased. It's biasing in favor of a select group of people, the ones that are identified as Israeli Jews, and it denigrates other people. So it seems to me a biased term. People call it racist term. That differentiates between inhabitants and their rights. But let's hear some more perspective on that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Greener. Rabbi Feldman, you've talked about that Judaism forbid initiating a state until Jews should wait a miraculous intervention from God to group them into or re-establish their state or in homeland in the Levant or in around the Palestinian lands. So how can this be interpreted in view of Zionism? What are the differences between Zionism and your definition of the initiation of State of Israel according to Judaism? Could you please shed light on that? Thank you.
Now, again, coming back to the previous question, what's the definition of Zionism? Zionism is the philosophy of building a sovereign homeland for the Jews, which is obviously racist. But in addition, as a religious person, as a religious Jew, what needs to be clarified is that Zionism is a transformation of Judaism from a religion into a nationalism. This was designed, as I said, this was designed by secular people, by atheists who didn't believe anything of Judaism, and still insisted to hold on to their Jewish identity. Now they had to come up with something new to be able to replace the old if they don't want to follow the old. Then they came up with this philosophy of Zionism, which is a new definition of Judaism. God forbid you no longer have to believe in God or follow his commandments. You just have to support or build this Jewish homeland in order to be Jewish. If I may, I'll tell you a short story. I was on a plane once from London to New York. I sit down and there's a gentleman next to me in an empty seat between us. I fall asleep. I wake up and I see the Haaretz newspaper between us. And I realize that my neighbor is a Zionist, which is, it's okay. We can sit together. And we went into a nice conversation. And then he goes by saying, whether you are right or wrong, which I consider an achievement, isn't it? It's already a question. Whether you are right or wrong, I will never give it up. I'll never give up the state of Israel. I risked my life in the army. I'll never give it up. And I said to him, I understand exactly where you come from. And this is an important point. All what defines me Jewish is the religion I practice. I can be an American Jew. I'm Jewish by the religion I practice. I'm American by nationality. Versus you, all what makes you Jewish is only your Jewish nationalism, your attachment to the Jewish state. If your nationalism comes under question mark, then your Jewish identity becomes under question mark, which is a tragedy. And we have to understand these people where they come from. It's a true tragedy, and they cannot give it up. A Jewish person, regardless whether, regardless what he follows, he would never give up his Jewish identity, and he might even give his life, and he should, not to give up the Jewish identity. But unfortunately, this Jewish identity is being misplaced, confused, and changed, and basically uprooted, which is a true tragedy. Now, the previous question, how this came in, Christian Zionism, the doctor explained this very well. Not necessarily is this in favor of the Jewish people, and it's so puzzling how Israel accepts this Christian Zionist support. It's very puzzling. But coming to Jewish people supporting Israel, supporting this movement, it's a good question how they managed to bring this anti-Jewish philosophy into Jewish people. There's many reasons and many ways how they did it. Generally speaking, it started after the Second World War, after the Holocaust. While Zionism is was started way before the Second War.
1897.
Okay, and they were not successful until the Holocaust. Why? Because Jewish people were so desperate after the Holocaust. There were masses of refugees. And this is a whole long discussion. They had alternatives where to go other than Palestine, but it was the Zionists at the time who stopped all alternatives, and they said either to Palestine or to no place. In other words, Jewish people, Jewish refugees from the Holocaust died because of the Zionist agenda to have them either to Palestine or to no place. But this is a whole different discussion. But at least many of those people who forcibly came in to Palestine, not because of the choice and not because they believed that this is the right thing to do, just because they were so desperate. And unfortunately, together with what I mentioned before, with this indoctrination of education, where the masses of the Jewish people are misled, unfortunately, it came into to a large degree.
Yeah, thank you so much. Netanyahu mentioned a few weeks ago in one of his interviews that we are going to continue our project of or to achievement of the prophecy of Isaiah. So he still uses some religious phrases to support his, I think, if I can say, his actions on Israel, towards Palestinians. So I think there is some tangible scriptures or scripts from religion that he's using, and he is backing up himself by these statements. And also he mentioned that in his meeting with Dr. Peterson 1 year ago, in fact, that Theodor Herzl is the new Moses, so the original Moses that we know, the prophet, and now that the Theodor Herzl is so he is glorifying Herzl as being a reference, as equivalent or close to Moses, the prophet. So could you please tell me to what extent his religious references that he's mentioning are accepted and believed amongst the Israeli community and the Jewish community of Israel, given that any people, I think, if he says Isaiah prophecy and such things, they will refer to these prophecies and they will read and they will find easily if he's truthful or not, or just saying fallacies. So I think this question is for Rabbi Feldman, and then I have a question to Dr.
Well, obviously, it's very easy to confuse people, and especially people who are not really properly educated and familiar with everything. Again, having Netanyahu, an official secular person, justifying his crimes by misquoting or misrepresenting the Jewish religion, it's very sad, it's unjust, it's hypocritical, and it's misleading, misguiding. I'm not sure exactly which verses, which concepts he have used in those interviews, but generally speaking, all what Israel stands for is in total contradiction of Judaism. There is no way to justify it, whichever way you look at it. He might use some verses from wars that took place in the times of King David. He might use some verses from the time that the Exodus, that Jews went out of exile and went into the Holy Land, to the land of Canaan. You know, all of this is very clear. Everything has its perspective, its time, and its surrounding of, you know, the religion around it. As I mentioned before, and there's so much more to speak about this, there is no way, according to Judaism, to justify any war against any nation. Let's make it very, very simple. And there is no wonder when you have a criminal as Netanyahu, for the same reason he doesn't mind to commit all those crimes, for the same reason he doesn't mind to misuse the religion he doesn't even practice. Now, in other words, he does everything he can to glorify it, to make it look proper, and to play on the ignorance of the people he speaks to. And unfortunately, this is just part of this whole Nakba, in this whole desecration of Judaism, this whole catastrophe for humanity, basically.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rabbi Feldman. Dr. Greener, I understand that there are on the ground now some proposition for a solution of the conflict between Palestinians and the Israeli. So as we heard a few moments ago, that Netanyahu does not accept Palestinians making a state with a neighboring state. They either to be exiled or to live under sovereignty of Israeli. So we have on ground three proposition: either two-state solution, which is Palestinians beside neighboring to Israeli. This is the first solution. The second solution is Jews, in fact, Palestinian living as sub-communities under Israeli sovereignty. Or a third solution, which is the inverse, which is Jews living under as sub-communities to within a Palestinian authority. So what do you think, or there is another solution that you might think of as a resolution of the conflict that we're living at?
This is the question that I'm sure everyone's grappling with. There's a fourth solution I've heard, or fourth idea I've heard as well. But but first of all, how do you even move to a situation where there's a regularized institutional relationship between Palestinians and Israelis at this point, when you have the rhetoric that is at such a high frequency as it is now? The term I believe Netanyahu used was calling the Palestinians Amaleki. This
What
is
does it mean?
what does it mean? It means that what it seems to mean is that it's a justification for killing everybody, annihilating
Okay.
everything, not just people, not just their babies, everything. That's what it means to someone listening to that who knows where that comes from. How do you start to rebuild a society when that's the discourse that's coming from the top? I mean, there's many steps that have to happen first. Netanyahu is clearly sowing division. I mean, it's not even a question. It's obvious. I mean, it's the whole infrastructure of the Israeli government, the military. It's not in any stance right now to try to build a relationship that's going to support, neighbors or any of the models you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not even sure it's a good question right now, because we're very far away.
Mm-hmm.
You could build the best model of two societies working together, living beside, within, whatever. But if there's that level of, animosity, it will obviously fall apart. Mm-hmm. So what needs to happen before there can even be some kind of a reconciliation, so that people can have, look at each other in the eyes and actually, walk by the streets and make sure that there's respect. Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, I think the process that was interrupted by all of this, which is a legal process against Netanyahu for corruption, mm-hmm. maybe that should play out. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could, get him out of the equation. Mm-hmm. Maybe there could be, I'm using the maybe in a rhetorical way, maybe there could be a full investigation of war crimes that have been committed. Mm-hmm. So we could have that out of the way first. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at Germany, which, wholesale murdered, millions of people. And they went through the process that was forced upon them by a military loss. Mm-hmm. And then, political and legal ramifications that came from that. Mm-hmm. And things turned around. That's left a weird mark on their psyche today, I think, but we could talk about that another time. But I think there needs to be an end to the violence, like starting with an immediate ceasefire. There needs to be honest discussion about what just happened. Mm-hmm. There needs to be repercussions for what just happened. Mm-hmm. That then remove players out of the equation that are clearly major obstacles to a peaceful future. But I'll just mention that it seems to me what I'm hearing people say is, from a pragmatic point of view, a two-state solution's off the table, a one-state solution's off the table, because I've heard some interesting options where there's one kind of state, but there's membership in different authorities that oversee members within that state who identify as Palestinian.
Very complex.
Because I think the complexity comes from the fact that there's just an untenable situation right now. And so I would, rather than ask that question, I would say, let's get down to dealing with the genocide that's happening now. Mm-hmm. And focusing on that. And hopefully once people can have an honest discussion about that genocide, and then people can understand like where they stood before, how they maybe feel now after this has been discussed properly, openly, ramifications have been realized, then maybe we can shake hands and move forward.
Thank you. Very inspiring. Thank you so much, Dr. Greener. I would ask you the same question, Rabbi Feldman, but with using another perspective. Probably I would just make an intervention from a little bit in the history, where if we look at the screen here, and I will just share that with also our audience from distance, so that they can see us. So what I would like to say here is that if we look at the blue, red zones and the green zones are representing the dominions or powers of different religious backgrounds over Palestine and Jerusalem. So we see that there was about 4 centuries of Jews in the years 1000 to 586 before Jesus Christ, and then it was at 313 after Jesus Christ that it turned to be under Christian powers, Romans, and then starting from 638, it was the start of Muslims taking over Jerusalem. So the question that is being put on the table is that why don't Jews live in communities under Muslim sovereignty as they are living, for example, in Morocco, or for example, living in, and in fact, when the Caliph Omar entered Jerusalem, and correct me, and I would like to hear your understanding of the story, when he took the keys of Jerusalem, he brought for the first time Jews who were exiled by Romans for 500 years, since 135 up to 638, and he allowed them to practice religion in Jerusalem, and he gave security to Christians to practice their religion. He refused to pray in a church to prevent himself being taken as a role model, and to prevent Muslims to convert churches into places of, or mosques and so on. So I don't see any bloodshed when the Caliph Omar took over Jerusalem. I don't see any religious oppression that was taken by Omar ibn Khattab, the Caliph. Why there's a fear of, I don't understand if this is a true fear or not, why there is a fear of Jews living in communities under Muslim sovereignty. And that brings me to one of the options, which is the 3 options that I proposed, which is Palestine return to be a Muslim authority in which Jews are living freely and with dignity, and their rights are fully protected. Why that is not an option, or is it acceptable or not? Thank you so much.
Well, certainly this is the right point, and this is the most important point that we have to remember from everything we speak about Palestine. We have to remember simple history, as you said. Jewish people lived in many Muslim countries. Palestine was an excellent example. We were the minority, Jewish minority, and we lived in respect. We were respected and protected. This is something that we should remember. Unfortunately, on purpose, is being eradicated from history, because the Zionist movement wants to have Jewish people believe that they cannot exist in Muslim countries. As you said, it happened to be that in many or in all Muslim countries, Jews lived in peace. Now the question is, why today don't we see, almost we don't see any Jew in those Muslim countries? There is so much to speak about this, how sad this is, and how destructive this was to the Jewish communities. In many cases, it was the Zionists at the time that caused problems for the Jews in those Muslim countries, in order to have the Jewish people think that it is the Muslims making them the problems and they have to leave. And they did this on purpose, because they needed the masses of Jewish people to immigrate to the new state of Israel. This is unjust how they portray the Muslims, right? And this was so tragic how they placed the Jewish people in danger. So many Jewish people were killed. One example is, there's a book, Ben Gurion Scandals, by Naim Giladi. I met him personally. He was one of those young teenage Zionists in Baghdad. He's an Iraqi Jew, and he was part of that gang that placed bombs in the Jewish synagogue in Baghdad in order to have the Jewish people fear to leave and to immigrate to Israel. Another story I heard from a Yemenite rabbi, lives today in occupied Palestine in Israel, and he told me this story, how the Zionists came to the mayor of that city in Yemen, and they placed a bag of cash on the table, and demanded of him to expel the Jews. And he said, I would never do this. These are my people, and I will protect them for every price. They took the bag of money, they left, and tomorrow morning, 2 or 3 Jewish people were shot dead on the streets, supposedly done by the Muslims. This is part of this sad history. Now, exactly what the solution is, what the solution is, what the future should be. We should, we say this in practical terms, but we say this religiously speaking, based on what I presented before, based on the basics of Judaism. We are supposed to we should use the past history as an example, how the future can look, how it's supposed to look, and how it will look, if we can manage to have the obstacle to peace, the cause to conflict, stop. And I always say we have to, in order to be able to figure out a better future, we have to study and understand what is the root cause of this problem going on. People think, and this is also part of the Zionist propaganda, it's just because we have a difference of religion, therefore we cannot coexist, and this is the cause to conflict. This leads to this notion that no religion will ever change, and this conflict will never change, and the only solution, the only alternative is to fight, and to continue fight, and to fight again, and to commit more crimes, and just at the end of the day, what's happening is that everything becomes so much worse as we see today. And it doesn't take us any place, none of us. It's not in favor of anyone involved. And unfortunately, it's destructive to everyone. We have to realize that the problem is not the difference of religion. We lived in peace despite any differences of religion for the longest time. It is the brutal, tragic, and anti-Jewish philosophy movement of Zionism, which is unfortunately causing so much death and destruction, not only to Palestinians, but also to Jews. And I always say, we have to stop this Zionism. We have to stop this occupation in its entirety, no two-state solution. Stop it in its entirety, obviously to bring justice to the oppressed people of Palestine, but also to bring safety and security to the Jewish people.
Thank you so much. Do you have something to say, please, Dr. Greener?
Quickly, yes. Yeah, I agree that the problem of there's no fundamental disagreement between Jews and Muslims. It breaks your mind to think of how that could be the case. Looking at the history, looking at interactions that we can have now that are depoliticized, but the problem is, you know, a lot of people that I organize with, we come from a tradition of progressive Jewish activism. You might call it Bundism. You might call it. There's a very rich history and important history of Jewish socialists, and the idea of nationalism is a real problem, actually, that needs to be investigated closely. What do we get? What do we gain from a nationalist perspective of the world? And as I mentioned earlier, do any countries really have a right to exist? What is a country? Because very often, you know, you can imagine, of course, there's some stability that's organized by a country. There's, you know, there's benefits that you can argue are made available, but there's a lot of conflict. As soon as you put up a barrier or a wall, there's one side and the other. It's binary at that point. And the idea of Zionism to create yet another country that, especially in a contested area, and then using religious arguments to justify one side versus the other, then things get mixed up. And the mix-up of Jews versus Muslims, for example, it's part of the collateral damage. But I would say it's collateral damage for this movement, this political movement. And people have all their own personal reasons for supporting it. Someone, you know, you meet on a plane, fought in the army and risked their lives, and they're not going to give that up after a while. Someone, you know, thinks that the political establishment of the country represents the freedom of the people of their family that was murdered in the Holocaust. Some people have, you know, maybe I would like to ask, you know, Biden and Justin Trudeau, like what are they benefiting from this? Or the arms manufacturers that are involved in all of this, who are, you know, using this opportunity to test and develop and sell new weapons. You know, there's there's a lot of problems that are coming out of the idea of nationalism and specifically the most heinous and cynical reasons to support sort of nationalistic. So I would say that rather, if we look at the core issues in Jewish culture that are unifying, like the idea of improving where you live. You don't need to en masse emigrate to a new country. You can work in collaboration with Jews, non-Jews, people with no faith at all, in an official God, with people with their own version of spirituality that they, have been working on themselves for many years to understand, and trying to, work in collaboration. And I think that's the missing part here. Is there's too much us versus them. It's completely counterproductive.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Just one word.
Yeah.
I would like to add that in addition to what I said before, even after all what happened, and even after all, let's call it hatred generated, even though the hate that we see today towards the Jewish people is a generated hate, it's not traditional anti-Semitism. But despite everything that happened, Muslims and Palestinians, and I say this all the time, I witness this all the time, they're still open to peace so easy and so quick. I visited Gaza, as I was introduced before. I visited Gaza twice since the beginning of the siege. Not even once, not even one person would say a bad word. They understood who we are. We have no connection with the occupier. We are against the occupation. We are simple people as we were before all of this, and people have no problem. We should encourage this. And this is exactly what we are trying to do all the time. I hope to join today a pro-Palestinian rally here in Quebec City. It'll be an honor for me. And I'm going to see the same that I'm seeing all the time. And this is something that we are trying to bring back home to our people to show, listen, we're so close to peace. And this is also what the Palestinian Muslim community is supposed to do, to show for the Jews this, we all have to, stretch the hand and try to work together and to show that there is no true animosity. This is like a manufactured thing, which is because of all what is taking place, which we all have to work together to stop for the sake of everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rabbi Feldman. We are now coming to the end of the discussion with the guest, and we are opening now questions from the in-person audience and those online. And we have received a lot of questions from people following us online. So we can start with online questions if we don't find questions from the room here. So we start by the room. Yeah, please.
I have two questions. The first one is, would you say one of the reasons it's so hard to objectively criticize Israel in Canadian academia is because Canada is itself a colonial country built on the same type of colonialism, and recognizing Israel's the criticism of Israel would mean recognizing our own.
So thank you so much for the question, but I repeat the question for those following us from distance. So why it is difficult to criticize Israel? Is it because Israel colonial project is similar to the Canadian colonial project? If I understand, did I express your question well? Yeah, okay. So what are the backgrounds for why it is difficult to criticize Israel here?
There's no doubt that Canada's colonial history and present history actually is a problem with respect to criticizing other colonial projects. I'm not sure that's the only reason, because you'll find lots of people who are critical of how Canada was established and its genocide on the Indigenous people that lived here before, their uprooting of their culture, their families, murders, mass graves. This all happened here too. And people understand that, and I think it's not as charged a situation to condemn. And I would say the reason for that is those are things that happened in the past. There are no institutions that are still pushing for genocide in Canada against the Indigenous people. So you are more free to academically explore that and understand that and criticize that. And try to make reparations to do what you can to address that. this is a completely different situation with Israel right now because it is, actually an existing force in geopolitics. There is immediate repercussions that people are afraid of receiving if they say something that is understood to be anti-Semitic. By the way, I think this is one of the reasons I'm sure you're having this conference, and it's one of the reasons that people of Jewish background want to assert themselves into, because we have, I think, a better ability to call that out without fearing those repercussions. It obviously is much more difficult to call a Jewish person anti-Semitic, though it's been done many times.
Thank you for your presence to defeat that.
Well, I mean, I think people of conscience have to do what they can at a perilous time, and so. But I think that's the reason that it's people are afraid to say the wrong thing, and they find it very confusing. What can I say? What can I not say? If at this point, but it's actually pretty simple. If at this point you can't say that there needs to be a ceasefire without someone calling you anti-Semitic, and that will happen. There's some layer of the people who want to continue this conflict who will go to those ends and call you anti-Semitic just for calling for a ceasefire. And of course, there's much more that you want to say beyond that. Then that has lost its meaning altogether, almost altogether. I guess it's a hard question it's hard to pull yourself away from the fear of being labeled anti-Semitic. But as long as we're careful what we say and we know in our hearts that we're saying this for the right reason, there's no reason to be afraid.
And thank you for our guests who are helping us to get rid of these type of fears. We are criticizing objectively with respect, without fearing to be anti-Semitic. Thank you. Yeah.
I can only advise if you do decide to speak up for justice, just make very clear what you're criticizing, whom you're criticizing. Nothing against Jews. I respect Jews. I met Jews and I know them. I have friends Jews. I'm sure you might have neighbors and friends Jews. Unfortunately, you have to clarify it.
Yes.
We weren't supposed to do that, but unfortunately, you have to.
Yes, and to make clear separation between Jews and Judaism and Zionism. Yeah. You have another question? So,
have any legal advice for continuing their studies on?
So again, can you repeat the question, please?
The question was, does IJV, Independent Jewish Voices, have legal advice to give to students who are studying? Centering their studies on Palestine? I don't know. I mean, legal advice is going to be fairly specific to a specific problem, and I think I'm not sure. Funded by one of the I would say if you have a specific situation where you are under financial threat or your studies or academic threat, you should contact us. We have a very, I would say, strong footprint in the Canadian university system. We have a campaign specifically focused on academic freedom in universities with respect to criticism of Israel and discussion in general of ways forward. So I can't give you a general answer on that, but I would definitely encourage you to contact me or someone in the organization.
Thank you so much. We'll try to alternate one question from the room and one question from online, please. Thank you so much. So now we have a question. I think I would address this question to Rabbi Feldman. As non-Jews, how to address the current situation with Jews for whom sometimes it is a very, very emotional question and who think being anti-Zionism is being anti-Semitic?
It's a very good question. The way I do it is try to make those people realize that you are not only concerned about Palestinian people killed, it's also Jewish people in danger. I always try to argue with people, it's our people in danger as well. You should never ignore the mass killing of the genocide of the Palestinians, but it's also the Jewish people suffering. And I truly mean it, and I'm sure that everyone here in the room agrees that nobody should be killed. And we have so many innocent people on all sides. We have amongst the Jewish people so many Jews who disagree with the occupation. Unfortunately, just because Netanyahu insists to represent us all, therefore so many people are being dragged into this conflict against their will. And we have to realize that this is tragic for everyone unless we all wake up and realize that this is wrong and this has to stop. Unfortunately, this tragedy, this knock that's just continuing for everyone.
Thank you so much. Do you have a question from the room? Yeah, please. Oui, oui, d'accord.
Juste prenons l'analogie à travers l'histoire du Canada, l'histoire d'Israël. On ne peut pas imaginer tout ce qui est pénal. C'est qu'on veut à un certain moment mettre les Palestiniens comme dans des réserves, certainement à long terme. Donc, c'est pas un projet donc les mettre à l'écart, on joue sur le long terme, mais c'est un moment de les mettre comme on voit, c'est les autochtones, donc les réserves séparées.
Donc, ségréguer, isoler les Palestiniens. Okay. So the question is it on the long term, the Israeli plan for Palestinians is to isolate Palestinians into a specific corner of Palestine, like exactly what happened to natives of Canada when they were segregated and isolated in the north. Is it, there's some analogy? So I would address that question to Dr. Greener.
Well, I think colonial countries do share their plans. I guess maybe they don't talk about it on the phone, but it's pretty widely understood how these projects were unrolled in different places. They do seem to follow a specific pattern. The difference is, you know, Wendake has, so this is a indigenous community close to Quebec City, and they have, you know, autonomy. They have their own economy. I don't like the idea of the fact that there's, you know, us and them necessarily, but they are not under siege. Let's just say this. And I think the main difference is twofold. Maybe three things. First of all, the Canadian or European settling of Canada and the US has been underway for longer. There's much more territory here. There's much more, so there's more flexibility, I guess, in terms of keeping sort of isolated groups not pushed up against each other, reducing friction, I guess you might say. And there's much less, you know, injected into all this, much less high-level nationalism and religious conflicting narratives. So, la question est posée en français, mais j'ai juste réalisé que j'ai commencé en anglais. Is it okay? Okay, désolé. So I think it's much, I guess you say, a much more hot situation, more friction in Israel, and has not had more time to resolve itself. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that in terms of this parallel that you've made, there are differences too. But I do think that there are the similarity is related to the colonial mindset, unfortunately, and it was brutal when it was unrolling in Canada. We had mass deaths of children as well, specifically done, you know, in direct proximity, not even with long-term bombs that you can pretend you had no intention of doing that, but after time and after a real concern by Canadians that this was wrong. There has been relaxed, you know, the situation's relaxed somewhat, but it's still not just. It's still not just that the first people that were here are economically and socially disadvantaged. But, you know, there are parallels and there are differences, I guess is what I will say.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Greener. We have a question that I would address to Rabbi Feldman. The question is, could you please explain to us the efforts of Protestant Christians that they made to help Jews come back to Palestine? And why did they support the Zionism movement so hard like Britain and Poland did?
I'm not the expert on that. You will have to find a Christian to explain this.
Yeah.
It's basically, as also Dr. Green mentioned this in very brief before, this is based on their belief system, which not necessarily is in favor of the Jewish people. And it's puzzling, as I said, it's puzzling that the Zionist movement is receiving that help. But it's one other link in the chain of supporting the Zionist movement, which is destruction to our religion, to our people, and to the humanity at large.
Yeah, thank you so much. We are ready to receive a question from the room. Yeah, please go ahead. Tu peux demander en français, puis après on va traduire. Donc, d'abord, I will just present Hamidou is the president of the INYL, which is the Muslim Association of Naval University, who is collaborating with making this event a success. Yeah. So. Okay.
Donc, ma question serait plutôt de voir, je ne savais pas comprendre pourquoi certains États occidentaux et les Américains soutiennent ce que fait Israël en termes de bombardement de massacre des populations civiles, alors qu'il y a eu quelques mois avant, défendait
Ukraine. Okay.
Qui subissait le bombardement de la Russie.
Okay. Yeah.
Ça, je ne savais pas comprendre.
Okay, so the president of EMIL is first thanking the guest for coming and accepting the invitation. So this is a great honor. Thank you so much. His question is about why the United States, when they were a few months ago defending the rights of Ukrainians against the Russian atrocities against these people, and now they are closing the eyes against what is happening in Palestine. Could you please shed some light on that? Who wants to?
Unfortunately, I have no response, no answer.
My speculation is probably what you would assume. The United States has an interest in Israel. They have an interest in what Ukraine could be vis-a-vis Russia, and its politics.
Yeah.
It's also money. It's also the weapons industry. They support war. I mean, they support war. You know, if they can sell more weapons to Ukraine, if they can sell more weapons to Israel, it seems to me that that's a motivating factor. That's a corrupt motivation, obviously. And so,
yeah,
you know, but that seems to be the answer. It seems to be what I see.
So, and I will permit myself also to add some phrase or statement from Biden himself that might answer the question. He said, if there was no Israel, if there were not an Israel, we would have to invent an Israel to protect our interests in the Middle East. S'il n'y avait pas d'Israël, si Biden, le chef des États-Unis, dit, s'il n'y avait pas d'Israël, on aurait créé un Israël pour protéger nos intérêts au Moyen-Orient. Donc, ça répond partiellement à la question, je pense. Donc, we will take a question from online, and we will just take more 15 minutes, and because we promised our guests to just take 1 hour and a half, and if you're generous, you have no problem to take for 15 minutes more. Thank you so much. Thank you. We have a question here saying that could the speakers confirm that today it is not a question of religion? It's not a war of religion. It is not Jews against Muslims and Christians. It is just a question of politics and colonization, and that religion is used as a tool for the purpose of colonization. I think we responded to that several times, but just a summary or an excerpt of that. So I think that question has been responded. So there's a question here to both speakers. How do you reach out to other Jews from the same or different sect of yours? Yeah, these are interesting questions. How do you, because you're raising up here very nice ideas and very pro-justice ideas, how do you communicate these ideas to other Jews of your or different sects? Yeah, please.
This is a challenging question, a challenging task. We try to do this in many ways. We are doing publications and leaflets and flyers. We try to meet people, meet communities, and in most cases, so many people are so hardline Zionist. There is nothing to do. There is no explanation, and nothing will work. But there are so many people who are open, and especially now, way more than like 2 decades ago. Things have unfolded during the past decades, and we always say it's so tragic that we have to pay this tremendous price, and we have to lose the lives of so many people, and so many people have to brutally be killed in order for people to wake up or to have the ability to start to understand. But unfortunately, this is the situation where we are in. And people understand today, or people are at least open way more than before, which is the benefit now more than before.
Yeah, thank you. And please, Dr. Greener, you have time.
Just a small addition that there are, I agree that it is difficult to have this conversation with people who've really closed their minds to options, because honestly, what they see is very closed debate. There's not much debate. It's very black and white. What you see on the news, what you hear from the so-called leaders that are leading war efforts. But one way that we're trying to expand the consciousness of Jews is to reach out to people who maybe they felt that they misunderstood what it is to be Jewish, and they misunderstood that they only hear that they're young. They've only heard that Israel is to be Jewish, and to be Israeli is to be Jewish, and that's all they really ever understood. And they maybe didn't feel nationalistic about that. They didn't like what they saw with respect to Israel, etc. But we're really trying to open the people's minds that you have inside of you something very special. You should not reject your Jewishness. You should basically open yourself to it. Open yourself to the feelings of social justice you have in your heart, the interest to have discussions and debate and inquiry into a broad range of topics, your love of Jewish cuisine. I mean, whatever it is that you have that brings you to a place where you can actually reclaim what is yours. And I agree that the idea of Zionism, political Zionism, whatever you want to call it, that is related to Israel, is a hurtful thing for Jews, because it closes them to their own Jewishness, and it makes them actually a tool for something that has nothing to do with their interests. And so, if we can awaken people that don't, expand the numbers of Jews basically who have maybe let that fall, we can find new people. So we don't have to convince necessarily people who are closed-minded. We just overwhelm the closed-minded people with, a new conscious of Jewish people that will try to have a cultural awakening and to change the narrative.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very, very inspiring. Please have a. Yeah. D'accord, avec plaisir.
En fait, chacun a donné une définition du sionisme. Et à mon avis, je pense que c'est un mot qui est créé pour divulguer le vrai sens de ce mouvement. Parce que tous les pays qui supportent Israël, en fait, sont des pays qui sont battus selon la colonisation. Et dans le fond, si on fait un retour dans l'histoire, on trouve que la guerre, c'est une guerre de religion contre l'islam. Et est-ce possible de collaborer, trouver un autre sens et pour essayer de travailler pour garantir la paix autour du monde et que les religions acceptent les uns les autres pour vivre dans la paix, pas seulement dans un pays qui s'appelle aujourd'hui et dans tout le Palestine. Donc, il faut vraiment...
Okay. Thank you so much for the question. I will re-express that in English. So he says that the definitions of Zionism was diverging a little bit between the two guests. So he thinks a third thing, or he wants to add that Zionism is not just a colonial project collaboration between Judaism and Christianism for colonial purposes and interests. He sees it also as a war against Islam and Muslims. So do you think that Zionism should be redefined and also to include that, and also could one day we arrive to a resolution between the three religions to coexist peacefully, not only to resolve the problem of Palestine, but also to resolve the conflict between the three religions as a whole in general, not only for Palestine, but so.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether we can do this as a definition of Zionism. This war between the Zionists and Islam. It might be. I'm not sure. It might be just this war that we see today is just an outcome of their movement and their philosophy. But in any case, you are right in the second half that we have to look forward for the future and we have to do everything we can to be able to live once again, regardless of our background, culture, or religion, as it was before.
Thank you so much. So we can, I think, yes, go ahead, please. Bonjour. Oui. Rabbi Feldman? Okay, yeah, en personne.
Mais j'aimerais parler un petit peu, je veux pas que je veux qu'il comprenne un peu ce que vous dites.
D'accord, j'essayerai.
Pour le traduire.
Ok, d'accord. Ouais.
Je suis un Marocain, je viens d'une petite ville et j'ai grandi dans un quartier juif.
Okay.
Je me rappelle bien, ma mère me racontait qu'à son enfance, à elle, à peu près, les musulmans sont une minorité, ils ont 3 ou 4 familles de musulmans. Et puis tout le quartier, c'était juste juif. Et puis ils ont leur école, leur synagogue. On vivait en harmonie, il n'y avait jamais de problème. Moi, quand j'ai grandi avec eux. Il y avait ces 2 familles la plupart. Il n'y avait jamais eu de problème et ça fait 40 ans maintenant. Je me rappelle encore des noms, il y avait Haïm, il y avait Shara, il y avait Esther, et puis ils ont même Haïm était.
Haïm, ça c'est quoi?
Haïm, c'est leur nom.
Ah, ok.
Et puis il y avait un qui était psychopathe. Même s'il était psychopathe, il s'attaquait aux musulmans. On prend en considération qu'il n'est pas responsable. Il y a des personnes qui l'auraient jamais fait mal. Quand on était petit, puis quand ils veulent faire des courses, par exemple,
d'accord.
On leur faisait des courses, il n'y avait jamais eu de problème.
D'accord. Okay, donc he says that he's a Moroccan and he is addressing the question to Rabbi Feldman, and he is telling that he lived in Morocco for 40 years with in a Jewish district, and he was living in harmony. The Muslims in that district were a minority, and the majority was Jews, and he's mentioning that that level of harmony was so high to the extent that when psychopath Jews who had some psychological problem that attacked a Muslim family, a Muslim member, they did not treat him badly. They just treated it as if it is whatever person, psychopath, who attacked someone else. So he does not remember any atrocities or aggression between Muslims and Jews all over the 40 years. Okay, that's what you said. Yeah. So.
On n'arrive pas à comprendre ce que nous les musulmans, par exemple, c'est la différence entre, par exemple, nous, on a nos affaires à nous, et eux, ils ont leurs affaires. Nous, on n'est pas bon parce qu'on est, par exemple, on vient d'ici, on est musulmans. On est bon parce que nos actes et nos valeurs sont bons. Et c'est-à-dire, pour dire que cette personne-là, c'est une bonne personne ou bien une mauvaise personne, c'est ses activités. C'est-à-dire, chez nous, on ne dit pas que puisqu'on est des musulmans,
okay.
on est le peuple élu, c'est-à-dire
d'accord, oui.
Qu'on soit noir, ou bien qu'on soit blanc, qu'on soit chinois,
got it.
N'importe quelle couleur. Parce qu'on ne comprend pas pourquoi ces gens-là vivaient, ça fait des centaines d'années avec nous. Et quand Israël a été créé, ils sont tous partis mal avec eux, ils n'ont pas vu quelque chose de mal.
D'accord.
Ce qu'on ne comprend pas, c'est que, est-ce que ce n'est pas une affaire de croyance religieuse? C'est que eux, c'est-à-dire, je côtoyais par exemple, que ce soit des chrétiens, des juifs, le fait que je suis juif, c'est-à-dire j'ai raison, j'ai plus de droits, j'ai une valeur plus que les autres.
Okay.
Et si on revient en arrière sur ce que on dit, c'est que nous, les fils d'Isaac, on est le peuple élu. Alors, tout ce qui vient avec, c'est des gens qui ont une valeur.
D'accord, c'est beau. So this is the question. So okay, so he is pursuing his question after the introduction that he lived in Morocco in a Jewish district very safely in harmony with the Jews. He's asking the question that when Israel has been created, the majority of Jews immigrated to Israel, although they did not suffer anything bad in Morocco. Why is that? And also, he feels that Jews consider their values superior to others' values just because they are the sons of Isaac. He says that I think in Islam we are judging person per his actions, according to his deeds, and not according to his beliefs. So what are your thoughts about that, please? Thank you. So who wants to? Yeah, okay. So he was addressing the other question.
First of all, these stories that you were saying regarding the relationship between Muslims and Jews in Morocco. Morocco is a very beautiful example. This is only one example. We have the same in many other countries. And we have to remember this, and we have to speak about this, and we have to have people realize how it was and how it's supposed to be and how it can be. Because unfortunately, this history is being, as I said before, it's being forgotten on purpose. It's being eradicated from history because the Zionist movement wants to have Jewish people and non-Jewish people believe that we can not exist. And that's the part of the tragedy. Why Jewish people immigrated? In many cases, I'm not exactly sure what the case was in Morocco, but in many cases, as I said before, this was direct Zionist propaganda or atrocities done in order to make Jewish people feel uncomfortable. And mind you, this is happening today as well. You know, when Netanyahu runs around the world, when something happens in Paris and something happens in the United States, and try to encourage Jewish people, you know, you want to be safe, come to Israel. What I always say is the most dangerous place for a Jew is in Israel today. But they use still this propaganda in order to play. Let me tell you this, you're not used to this here maybe, but in my communities, like my colleagues come from Montreal, the same happens by us in New York. You know, since October 7th, there is so much more protection for the Jewish people. You have the helicopters in the sky whenever there's a Palestinian demonstration. You have policemen in front of Jewish synagogues. And 2 weeks ago, I went over to the sergeant of the police and I asked him, may I make a joke with you? Now, why are you spending so much money? Just let's clarify that these Jewish communities are not supporting the genocide, and everybody's in security. You know, there's no problem. But unfortunately, this is being used for propaganda to make the Jewish people afraid that something is wrong, something is going on, that we are in danger. And unless we have security in the United States or in Canada, or unless we have the IDF supporting the Jews, then all Jews will be killed. This is propaganda and this plays on the emotion of people. And usually when people get scared, you know, fear is a very strong tool and it takes people out of their mind and out of their control. And unfortunately, some people come to conclusions they would never come to. It's just because of this massive fear. But your last point about how Jewish people regard non-Jews, unfortunately, this is also a tragic part of this Zionism, which fuels conflict. One of the basics of Judaism, there's Elijah the prophet writes in the book Tana de Bayalio, and he says, you don't have to be Jewish to inherit the world to come. If you are righteous, you believe in God, basics of belief happens to be that Muslims are the closest to Jewish people, then you are a righteous human being. If you are Jewish, you have much more that you have to follow and you are bound to. But unfortunately, this difference of religion is being used to fuel conflict and to fuel bloodshed, and we should not allow this.
Thank you. Okay.
Est-ce que, je vois que vous parlez franchement, est-ce que, en tant que juif, est-ce que vous considérez, parce que chacun de nous se considère qu'il a raison, c'est-à-dire, j'ai plus de valeur parce que je crois mes valeurs. Ça, c'est pour les musulmans, c'est-à-dire, je suis un musulman parce que je suis Dieu, puis je fais ce qui m'a demandé de faire. Mais est-ce que pour le, ça, j'ai constaté dans la vie que je disais, est-ce que si je suis un juif, je suis bon parce que je suis cette lignée-là, ou bien je suis bon parce que je suis un juif. Parce que pour un musulman, on sympathise avec les Ukrainiens parce qu'ils sont bons, ils sont musulmans, et puis les Syriens qui ont été tués, Non, c'est pas grave. C'est
I
que
think.
si les autres, leur son, il a de la valeur, et puis les autres.
Yeah, thank you.
C'est comme il est aux sources de tout ça. C'est une question de racine.
Ok.
On considère moi, et toute ma lignée,
Okay.
c'est le peuple élu, c'est le peuple qui a plus
Yeah.
de valeur que les autres.
But I think he's asking, but I think you responded to that. He asking he wanted to confirm or to ask you to emphasize on the point is whether it is a question of race or a question of deeds and righteousness. So I think you responded to that. So
I can add on this.
yeah. So okay.
Good question, race. Judaism is not a race. Judaism is a religion. You can convert into Judaism. We don't push people to convert. You don't have to, as I said, you don't have to be Jewish to be righteous, but you can convert. And according to Maimonides, which is one of the major scholars in Judaism, if one lacks the belief, the basics of Jewish belief, they are no longer considered part of Judaism. Now, Judaism is not a race.
Thank you for this response. So it's not. Merci beaucoup. So we promised to finish. Oh, sorry. We have to. Okay. Ah, mais si tu veux. Ok, dans moins de 10 minutes, s'il vous plaît. Ok, s'il vous plaît. Ouais.
C'est l'islam qui est.
Ok.
Et ça ouvre des portes de discussion qui finissent par. Mais ce n'est pas tous les musulmans sont.
Okay, c'est bon. And that's it for everything. Yeah, thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much for all of you who are attending in room and for those who are following us online. Thank you. With that, we come to the end of our meeting. We address our guests with sincere thanks for their attendance and for their discussing with us and for their inspiration that they have instilled in us. Thank you so much, and please join me to warmly thank them. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Holman. Thank you, Dr. Rina. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.